I'm glad that you're all here today for the last actual live lesson. So today is actually going to be a lesson. Next week will be the last official class where we'll be actually conducting a workshop. So, it'll give you an opportunity to share some of the writing that you've been doing up to this point. Maybe get some ideas from Javier and Abraham if he's able to join us as well as me. And this will hopefully be a session where, speaking of the one for next week, where you'll be able to start finalizing some of the work that you'll be turning in for the final anthology. And regarding the due date, I'm actually going to extend it to the end of the month. So you'll have an additional 2 weeks after next week to finalize your writing and get feedback from us on anything that you turn in through Google Classroom. But yeah, I'm glad that you're here. And actually, the three of you that are on the call right now were actually not here for last week's. So I wanted to obviously do a quick review, check in to see if you, one, had a chance to watch the video from last week, and if you had any questions about the lesson from last week. So I'll open it up to you, see if there's anything I can get you caught up on.
Last week was the corrido lesson, right? Just yes, right?
Yeah,
okay.
That was
sorry,
the corrido lesson.
I've gotten a little confused. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's all good.
Hi, Javier. I feel like I know you because I keep seeing you in my recording.
Good. Thank you. I just want to thank you, Louis, for extending the deadline for those of us who are teaching, and we're in our last 2 weeks of final nonstop trying to wrap up all of the classes and get the students ready for the presentation and everything. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I figure, the more opportunity you guys have to really finalize your writing and to give a chance, for the other people that are enrolled in the class but unable to attend the live lessons, give everybody a chance to binge watch our lessons on YouTube and, hopefully get inspired through the videos. And last week's lesson was on the corrido, which is a traditional Mexican form that is inspired by the Spanish romance, which is really just like another version of the ode, which was the previous lesson that we had done. But yeah, did anybody have any questions or anything that they wanted to ask regarding the corridos?
Yeah. So I wasn't able to catch the whole video from last week, but did you guys touch upon like the the transition of the corrido in regards to like what it is or what it was and like
its current form?
Yeah, its current form, what it's like kind of like the connotations that it currently has.
Yeah, we did talk about it a bit, and even though like the current version of corridos are more on the like boast side and the narco corrido side, there's definitely still structurally some of the elements of a classic corrido. And so when we were discussing the corrido last week, we did talk about how odes and the corrido especially were really meant to be done with music, with musical accompaniment. And so, in that sense, the corrido is still pretty traditionally the same. But I think, main thing that I wanted to emphasize last week was that the corrido has a very specific structure. And so it is 4 octosyllabic lines that make up each verse of the corrido. And so if you use that structure, meaning you have 8 syllables per line, and you have every verse be 4 of those 8-syllable lines, then you're ultimately following the structure of a corrido. And then to make it an actual corrido, your first verse is always going to be, like the introduction, setting up what the story is going to be. Then the following verses tell the actual story of the individual that's being, paid respects to in the corrido. And then the very, very last verse is going to be the despedida, which is going to start usually with something like, with this last verse I say farewell, or, something along the lines of that. Usually done in Spanish, ya con esta me despido. And that would be your 8 lines, or sorry, your 8 syllables for the first line. And Ani, I did get a chance to read your corrido, and it was very, very well done corrido. Thanks for uploading that
Thank
to
you.
Google Classroom for us to review.
I was really nervous about this class. I wasn't sure who I was going to write about, and I knew who I wanted to write about, and I didn't think that I could do it. There's so much to say, right? And I am really shocked, even when we start talking about the lesson, that I was able to write. I'm having an easier time on this class than even the Conchas class assignments, which really surprised me. But the lessons have really kind of laid the foundation. By the time I finished watching the lesson about the ode, I knew exactly, how I needed to attack it. And the corrido, I'm like, oh my God, come on. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to write in Spanish. And I don't know how do I turn this into, But when you said the ode will help set you up for the corrido, I was like, wait a second. Yes, I know how to take the elements of what I kind of dug up, excavated during that process, and I can just bring it here. So it's been really exciting process.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, it's definitely doing an ode in preparation for writing a corrido. I wanted to make sure that people had the option, right? So now you have actually a couple of different pieces that you could potentially submit, and if you wanted to, you could even do all of them, and they would all work the same to just reinforce the story of your hero. So yeah.
So altogether, we're the assignments are going to be three works that we're going to be
3 to 4.
3 different projects that we're gonna attempt, and then right.
Yeah, that's correct.
So this is the last lesson, so there's going to be one more assignment, or
yeah. So today, and that's a good segue for the lesson for today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It was all planned, I swear. So
planned.
yeah. Planned and planned. So for actually to segue us into what we'll be discussing today, hopefully you'll be able to see my screen here. We have actually, following my usual structure for teaching a lesson, we actually have a quote that I'd like us to discuss a little bit. And this quote comes from The Last Unicorn, written by Peter S. Beagle, who was primarily a fantasy fiction writer. He was a novelist and a screenwriter, and I believe he's still producing work. He was born April 20th, 1939, so he's still alive. And he wrote, "Men have to have heroes, but no man can ever be as big as the need, and so a legend grows around a grain of truth, like a pearl." So I'm going to copy this and paste it into our chat here, so that way we can reference it. But what do y'all think about what Peter Beagle has to say about legends?
It's profound, because it's one of those things that, yeah, of course it's that way, because that's how, all that big space that one person can occupy, because it's not as big. That's where all the legends come from, and that's where all the different interpretations come from, over the years, or whatever we're talking about, decades, centuries, where the story just builds. And like the latest story I'm telling about this so-called person, whoever it is, could be different from what they said 100 years about them. So it's interesting. That's just an interesting comment, how things just get added to it, because a lot of it's oral history. So what's that? I don't know if it's the son of me, but it's the old thing where you tell someone a story, and then that person calls somebody else, and by the time the 5th person calls it, whatever, the 100th person, the story is almost completely changed, and that's just because people are going to put things into it. But hopefully the hero, they're just adding things to it like clay that pertain to the hero and the legend or whatever it is that that hero originally inspired. Hopefully it doesn't go off in a total different track and then becomes something like, oh, now it's the Llorona, and it started off as someone who fought for like farmers' rights or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that just made me think of like Cesar Chavez, 1,000 years from now being called El Llorón.
I mean, right? Because people just adding to it, and then it could be negative stuff they add to it too. To
yes,
a legend.
and that is a good
that's
point.
Really interesting comment, statement by the writer.
Yeah, it's kind of like
I felt this huge burden lifted when I read that, it's a legend that grows around a grain of truth like a pearl. I was like, and it's what this whole class has been, is by taking on the forms of the ode and the corrido, we've been given permission to venerate these people, right? And to go to tell our version of it and tell our interpretation of it. And this just felt like such a freedom. Like I'm writing about somebody whose life was really bigger than life. But it's hard to express that, right? But because of the forums we've been working at, it's opened the floodgates. It's given me the freedom, the license to tell the story. And it's almost like I couldn't tell the story any other way. Like if I tried to write it as just a straight up autobiographical, I could never tell it. And because of the approach that we're taking, it's allowing me the freedom to actually tell a story. It's truer than the truth, if that makes sense. And it's so counterintuitive because you feel like you got to get the facts right. But sometimes it's not about the facts, it's about the feeling. And this just captures this whole class for me. It's like, as long as we have that grain of truth, that's okay. Like the rest, is still just as valid. It's the hero is two parts. They're the person, and then there's the story, and that's okay. We're the storytellers, and in telling the story, like Luis, you've said, we're telling about ourselves sometimes more than we're telling about that person because of how we tell it. And so there's a freedom in that, especially when, like Javier was saying about like writing about somebody that especially if they're still alive, do you have the license to do this or do that? Or, if certain things you write, what if it's not completely factual? You don't understand everything that's underneath it, or you're only telling a piece of the story, but that's okay because that's the art part of it,
Yeah.
You get to highlight what you want. You're not drawing every single feature. You're drawing what you want to portray, and that's okay.
Right.
It's such a release for me when every time I get to that last phrase of this.
Well, good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, Bobby. Well, really quick, only because I want to go off what Annie was saying. That really struck. She's saying we're the storyteller, right? Whether she's writing it or drawing it, whatever. And I'm thinking of the actual singers when they sing the corridos. They're not just they're not just reading off a list of, oh, he did this, and this. I mean, they're waving their arm. They might be crying. They might be laughing. They might be doing the you know what I mean? It's like so. It's like Annie's saying, whether you're writing this or you're out there belching it out on a stage, yeah, you are going to take on some of the, put a little artistry in it, maybe a little flamboyance, and that's one hell of a way to get the attention of the audience. Don't be boring. Really put on performance, but give out the story somehow.
Hey, well, those of us who saw just finished watching the Selena series, when she's doing her shoot, it's like they're like, hey, she's a good actress, and the father looks at the director like she's talented, but yeah, no, she delivered, like those. It was a performance, and she delivered. Check it out. Check out the series. But in regards to dissecting, like the quote here, like the first line, men have to have heroes. What it says there, it's like men have to believe in something. right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a hero is someone you kind of like, believe in some sort of some sort of way. And then like no, with like the whole no man can ever be as big as the need. It's like there's always more. Humanity always wants more, and yeah, no man will be able to kind of fulfill that, unfortunately. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a really cool, really good quote. Really good quote.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you feel that way, and I agree. I think that the sentiment of the quote is that yes, we all need something or someone to believe in, and no individual. I think that's sort of to remind us that everyone is human, everyone has flaws, and so there's no way that a person could be the perfect hero for us forever. But the legend that surrounds that individual, it's going to be based on a grain of truth, and like a pearl, it'll be something that'll be valuable, that will have value, that lasts much longer beyond that original idea of who the person is, of who that hero is to the individual. So I think that it's good to remember that what we are doing through this series and what you're hoping to accomplish in writing about the person that you selected to be your hero. You're building on their legacy. You're building on the things that they have done for you as a person, on the things that they did to empower you, to make you feel a sense of pride, to make you feel proud about who you are. So just like Ani was saying, what you are doing it says a lot about the person that you're doing it for and a lot about you. And so it's ultimately going to have that little bit of DNA that comes from you plus the DNA of the person that you're writing about. So I think it's also good for us to understand, what is an actual legend? What does it actually mean to create a legend or to write a legend? And so for that, let's refer back to our handout here. Hopefully you're able to see it. We have the formal definition of legend here. A legend is a story coming down from the past, especially one popularly regarded as historical, although not verifiable. Right? So for the majority of you, the hero that you're writing about is actually an individual that is not well known, right? Based on the answers that we got on the questionnaire from the very, very first session, everyone is choosing a family member. And even in some of those cases, this family member, you only know what has been told to you about that family member from the past, or what you might have observed about that family member from the past. In the case of like Mil Máscaras, who is Javier's selected hero, Mil Máscaras is a public figure. There is a way to verify certain components about his past, but the legend that Javier may choose to write about Mil Máscaras is going to be a personal legend. It's going to be perhaps a legend about, the way that Mil Máscaras influenced Javier. And that's something that only Javier would be able to verify for us. So further down the line in the future, when a person picks up the book that we're producing, say 25, 50, 100 years from now, there's going to be really no way to verify 100% the legend that we are establishing now through this series. So, are there any questions about what actually makes a legend a legend? I think it's pretty clear.
What stood out to me in that little line you put up was something that's said it's popularly known to be historical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I'm curious about that. Like, why do we like it? Why do we like a little historical truth to it? Is it because we want the legend that we're thinking about? Like, well, it was true. This person did exist. Maybe it's all blown up really big now, but like we want that kernel of truth because no offense, but I'm sure none of us believe in Santa Claus right now. But we just we enjoy the idea of Santa Claus, but we're not going to get all like misty-eyed about him. Whereas would a legend, because it was true, right? Yeah, the person was born in Downey, California, in 1930, and they struggled over. I mean, I think we need that to justify. We need that grain of truth, of historical truth, to maybe justify our veneration of the person. I'm wondering if that's the case, because that stood out to me, that little line in that sentence.
Yeah, I do think that word popularly regarded as historical is popularly is a very, very important word there. Yeah.
Well, how can it, like, for those that are that will watch this, I guess I don't want to offend any Selena fans, but I think it just, there's been a lot of it just, what's going on right now. It's like, even with this class, it ties in so well. There's a lot of criticism to the series in regards to, it's like the show is not living up to the expectation of who she was. But the character that our current society has become to know, a lot of people, they associate that with the film. They associate that with all the articles and everything that came out after her passing. And so I think this is great timing for what's going on. But yeah, and I think it rings true.
Yeah, because after Selena passed, like, of course, at least in the beginning, of course, all the stories and legends are going to be their most venerable. Is that the word? Because she just passed away, right? So everyone's going to elevate her probably the most at those few months or whatever the period is, and then that gets stuck in people's memory. Okay, she was the best, like a goddess, a saint, whatever. And I like her. I'm not knocking her. So now, years later, when they do, I haven't seen the series, but maybe they're trying to be more honest, give a full life story of her. So some fans may be offended, like, hey, she didn't get bad grades in high school. Why are you focusing on that? But that could be true. It doesn't make her a bad person. But again, it's almost like she's a victim of her own legend. But it's really the burden is on the people who want to believe, whatever they believe about her, however high they want to put her on the pedestal. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing about legends. You can't, you put it up there, you interpret it one way, you're going to get yelled at, you're going to get praised, it's interesting.
Yeah. I think that, it's also really important to remember that, we're talking about people, right? And just like the quote says, no man can ever be as big as the need for the hero, right? So the individual person, flaws and all, could never really live up to the need for us to believe in something, to believe in a hero, right? That's why the legend must exist. And aside from that, it's also really important to understand that there is a kind of like sort of like a filter that is placed on the legend by the person writing or creating the legend, right? So what you will be doing is ultimately, through this workshop series, is you're going to be telling the story of the hero from your unique perspective, right? That's why it's really important to remember, from what we've discussed the last several weeks, is that we're writing from a place of personal connection, of your own connection to this individual, and it's going to be really as much about you as it is about them. So I just want to reiterate that, because the sample of writing that we're going to be reading today, I think very much illustrates that. If you had a chance to actually download the handout from Google Classroom, you'll see that the piece comes from Eduardo Galeano. And we got a little mini bio here of Eduardo Galeano. He was born on the 3rd of September in 1940, passed away on the 13th of April in 2015. He was from Uruguay. He was a journalist, writer, and novelist, and among many things, was considered to be global soccer's preeminent man of letters and a literary giant of the Latin American left. ultimately he is very, very much known as a person that was very pro socialism, and very, very much against the dictatorships, the multiple dictatorships that he actually lived through in Latin America. So he was, in some cases, an enemy of the state, and he did move around a lot from country to country because of the different political situations. But this particular piece comes from his book called The Book of Embraces, or El Libro de los Abrazos. And obviously, it was written originally in Spanish, so we do have it in the original Spanish. And we also have it in the translated English that I did for the workshop here. Do I have a volunteer that might want to read for us the mini legend here written by Galeano for Neruda?
I'll read the English.
Yeah, all right. Go for it, Ani. Whenever you're ready.
There's only 3 of us, so
yeah.
I was at La Isla Negra at the house that belongs to Pablo Neruda. Entering was prohibited. A wooden fence surrounded the house. There, people recorded their messages for the poet. They left not even a small piece of wood uncovered. Everyone spoke to him as though he were alive. With pencils or nail points, every person found their own way to say, "Thank you." Without words, I also found my own way, and I entered without entering. And in silence we sat, talking wine, the poet and I, silently speaking of the seas and love and some infallible potion for fighting baldness. We shared some shrimp al pilpil, I guess, and marvelous crab cake, and other such wonders that bring happiness to the soul and belly, which are, as he knows, 2 names for the same thing. Many times we lifted our cups of good wine, and a salty wind would hit our face, and everything was a ceremony of cursing the dictatorship, that black lance piercing his side, that unbearable pain. And everything was also a celebratory ceremony of life, beautiful and ephemeral, like flower altars and transitory loves.
Excellent. Thank you, Ani. And just so we could hear it in the original Spanish, do I have a volunteer that'd like to read it in Spanish?
I'll try.
All right.
Estuve en la Isla Negra, en la casa que fue de Pablo Neruda. Estaba prohibida la entrada, una empalizada de madera rodeada la casa. Allí la gente había grabado sus mensajes al poeta. No habían dejado ni un pedacito de madera sin cubrir. Todos le hablan como si estuviera vivo, con lápices o puntas de clavos. Cada cual había encontrado su manera de decirle gracias. Yo también encontré, sin palabras, mi manera. Y entré sin entrar. Y en silencio estuvimos conversando, vinos el poeta y yo, calladamente hablando de mares y amares y de alguna pócima infalible contra la calvicie. Compartimos unos camarones al pipil y un prodigioso pastel de jaivas y otras maravillas de esas que alegran el alma y la barriga, que son, como él sabe, 2 nombres de la misma cosa. Varias veces alzamos nuestros vasos de buen vino y un viento salado nos golpeaba la cara y todo fue una ceremonia de maldición de la dictadura. Aquella lanza negra clavada en su costado, aquel dolor de la gran puta y todo fue también una ceremonia de celebración de la vida, bella y efímera, como los altares de flores y los amores de paz.
Excellent. Good job,
so
Bobby.
Beautiful in Spanish. It really feels different.
Yeah, it really does. Like language, it can like it communicates it in such a different form.
Yeah, the language obviously does sound, I think, a bit more romantic
Yeah, it
in the
romanticizes
Spanish.
it.
Hmm Um, but the message is ultimately the same, I think, you know, regardless of the language. So, what did you all think of the piece overall?
Well, it's interesting. Um, it's like, so it'd be Pablo, right? He's the narrator of the. No, it's
Well,
the Pablo.
Eduardo Galeano,
Eduardo, right?
yeah. Or
It's
we would just
like,
say the speaker, since we don't know exactly if it's Eduardo Galeano,
right.
but yeah.
It's like we talk about, we have to like fill up the space of the legend and make it bigger. But it's almost like he has a need too, as a person, as someone who's looking for a hero, or
Mm-hmm.
it's like he has. I think we all. I'm thinking. I think we do. We all have that need. That's probably what draws us to the legend, and maybe that's why we make the legend bigger, because we're putting things in from ourselves that we want in there. And that's the sense I get,
Mm-hmm.
because he's walking in this place, and like all the other people, they want to speak, they want to lose stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's a need that you have. It's kind of interesting. It's not just about that hero we're writing about, but maybe you need a lot of stuff, as a person, we,
Mm-hmm.
and find that hero, and rightly or wrongly, I mean, maybe we're putting stuff in there that's not there already, but we need that piece in there,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of fits in the Mil Mascaras legend, so we put that in there. So
Yeah.
that's my take on this, as far as how much we need something out of that hero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
When he says, "I entered without entering,"
Mm-hmm.
is he having an imaginary drink of wine or hanging out with this person?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is, right?
I think so. I think we can assume that he
Like
says
when you
that he found
imagine
his
you're
own way.
hanging out with your with your idol.
Yeah.
You wish you were.
If we could just hang around and drink a bottle of wine together, what would we talk about? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very safe to assume that we're reading a piece in which the narrator is imagining their connection uh, to Pablo Neruda. Now, one thing that we kind of have to our benefit here is that a lot of people know who Pablo Neruda is, or are aware at least of his work. Pablo Neruda was a poet from Chile who was also socialist. He was communist. He, had to flee from Chile because of the dictatorships that uh, that existed during his lifetime there. Um, and he's known as the love poet, right? Most people, when they think of love poetry and they think of Latin American poets, they immediately know Pablo Neruda is known for his love poetry. So he wrote a lot about love, and there are mentions of love and all of that in the piece.
Not having all that context, there's when I read it, I just saw two aging intellectuals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just enjoying the moment. Just being present.
Mm-hmm.
And enjoying the sensual pleasures and
Mm-hmm.
the small pleasures and stuff, and it felt like he was longing for a connection to a like-minded kindred spirit.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a big part of this piece, is that connection to a kindred spirit, right? I mean, they even are talking about or at least there's an imagined conversation about a cure ultimately for baldness, right? Um, you know, you don't have to know that Pablo Neruda suffered from baldness early in life, uh, but the fact that our writer says that, you know, you immediately make that connection that they're both bald, you know, they're both aging, you know, and they both have a love for good wine and good food.
And that's really all we know. All we know is what they have in common.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as much a reflection of the narrator as it is of the topic.
Yeah.
Person of topic.
Yeah, the person being written about. Right. So ultimately, though, I think that at least for me, I should say that knowing a lot about Pablo Neruda and actually having Pablo Neruda be one of my idols in terms of poetry, one of my poetry heroes. You know, everything that Galeano writes in this particular piece really does build on the legend of Pablo Neruda. You know, his love for all the sensual pleasures that are mentioned. You know, those are all things that Pablo Neruda is really known for, and it really is just augmenting, just adding on to that already very shiny pearl that is the legend of Pablo Neruda. And so, you know, it's done in a way that really talks about that personal connection to Pablo Neruda. You know, the narrator of this piece found their own way, you know, acknowledges that everyone else finds their own way to say thank you, right? Because other people that visit Isla Negra, you know, they, whether it be with a pencil or with the point of a nail, you know, they find their own way to say thank you. And, you know, here now we have the narrator's way of saying thank you to Pablo Neruda. Any questions or anything that maybe you wanted to add? Any last comments in looking at this piece?
Well, you were talking about the way we say thank you, the way the writer has said thank you. I think that's something we always want to do for our heroes too. Is like the one thing I know I do a lot, like on social networks. Like I'll mention like a comic artist I love, Steve Ditko. Like, and I realize like I'm always mentioning him, or if there's some little anecdote that came up, or I bought some comic of his. You know, you always share it, and I think it's because you want people to know, right? Like, hey, somebody may look at that post and go look up about him more, and like I'll feel I have done a good job. You know, I even did a little zine about him a couple of years ago. So I think that's just one of the ways. Again, we venerate, we honor our heroes. You know, keep the legend alive, put the word out somehow, in the hopes that maybe one or two new people will get on board on it. Join this. That's just interesting, like you said, about how people want to thank the hero. Because a lot of times, yeah, you can't go meet them because they either live somewhere far or they passed away a long time ago. So I think that's a way of thanking them publicly.
Yeah.
And then trying to, like I said, for me, maybe get more people interested in this particular person or something. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you guys really realize this, but you know, in selecting the people that you selected that you want to write about, you're ultimately writing your thank you letter to them, right? And you're doing it in a way that celebrates their life, celebrates their accomplishments, celebrates their humanity, even. You know, because just like we talked about in the very, very first session about, you know, that every hero has their flaws. You know, it's those flaws, those challenges that they have to overcome that ultimately inspires us and makes them feel relatable to us. And so, you know, if it's, say, you know, losing a business, sacrificing their business because they were so involved with the community, you know, that can be seen as a character flaw, but that's also what ultimately makes them so admirable, because in spite of that, they still, you know, were able to erect a monument to their community. And I'm specifically talking about
So
Ani's.
specific.
Yeah, I'm specifically talking about Ani's hero, and what she's shared so far about him. Um, you know, Bobby, the hero that you mentioned before, that you hope to honor, that person being, I think, was it a congressman? I remember it being a politician. Um, you know,
Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia of the 4th Congressional District.
yeah, I'm sure that person, had to sacrifice a lot in order to get to the point where they are and are still now, obviously working to help elevate their community and doing it in such a way that it inspired you. And so, you know, and Javier Mil Máscaras, I mean, you shared with us a little bit about, the fact that he inspired a sense of pride in yourself and your culture, your heritage, and that was done likely at a cost, not just to his body, but also to his relationships with maybe his family, and the people that thought that him choosing the profession of professional wrestler, as kind of like a very egotistical thing to do, or as a thing that would never make him money, right? So there's those personal sacrifices that our heroes will make in order to elevate us as people. And I think that's one of the things that kind of comes out a little bit, at least in this piece by Galeano.
I want to say that I'm also experiencing this writing about somebody who's not around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like a way of keeping their memory alive, and the ode in particular was like, it's kind of there's an immortality
Mm-hmm.
about the whole form. It's just it's like a form of worship to keep that person,
Mm-hmm.
Alive, and it's like the thank you. It's honoring them, but it's also like keeping them relevant and alive
Mm-hmm.
through words and words and art that is action. It just feels like they're still producing
Mm-hmm.
something. They still have a legacy and an impact through us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, if there aren't any other questions or anything related to what you're doing now, I'd like to give you basically your prompt for this last session. And your prompt now is to basically build on the legend of the person. You can do it through poetry. You can do it through a short fictional piece. But remember that there's always that little grain of truth that does basically help the legend grow. That's at the very core of the legend. And so if you decide to, say, follow the route of Eduardo Galeano, imagine the conversation that you would have with your hero and write about that. Write that conversation out. Show us what you would do, show us what you would discuss, and show us basically your thank you letter for inspiring you.
It's interesting because we're talking right now about most likely you don't get to meet your hero. Sometimes Bobby could obviously meet the congressman. He's still working and he lives in the same town with him. But like I was thinking the other day, I did actually meet Mascaras one time, and met him. Not saw him in the ring. It was at Frankenson's thing we got here locally, so a big convention, and he was signing. It's like, oh my god, I gotta go meet him. Because honestly, I don't think I ever seen him live in a wrestling match, as far as I remember. So it's like, wow, I get to meet him. And, we're talking about, having this guy was sitting having wine and stuff with his hero. But it's different when I saw him, because I was all, I just said a few words to him. But, talking now, like if he was signing again, I think I would have more questions. I'd want to be not so fanboyish, and then not gonna have a conversation with the guy. He's got a line of people, but yeah, it's interesting. When you do meet the hero, sometimes you can't be very composed and have an actual, legit discussion.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey man, can I have your autograph and a photograph? Thank you. I love you. That's kind of interesting.
I love that you were like not sure if you'd actually seen him live. Like the legend in your mind is so immense that that fantasy and reality have like, you feel like you've seen him live, but you probably haven't. That's so cool. My father used to say that my grandfather was such a great storyteller, and of course he got that from his dad too. That he would talk about the birthplace, the village where he grew up. He goes, I actually was not born there. I used to always say that my father was born in that same village as my grandfather, but he wasn't. And later in life, he clarified that. He goes, actually, I wasn't born there. I've never been there. He goes, but the way my father used to describe it, I felt like all the characters, all the people, I felt like I had been there, like I knew all of them. And ironically, he had that same impact with all of his stories to me, But that's so cool because I think that's also part of that legend is the story in our mind, that we project that out on is our reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how your dad got sucked to the gravitational pull of the legend. Like, oh yeah, I'm from there. Like, okay, well actually I'm not really from there, but that's the legend. That's the beauty of the legend. It's just beyond time and space, I guess. But
yeah.
The other reason I hate to admit it, I may not remember. I mean, we're talking. I've known of Mascaras like 40 plus years, so it's like maybe I saw him, maybe I just forgot, but time can be a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
But the legend's always better.
So now you said we're writing a poem or a short story or whatever form we want.
Mm-hmm.
We're not actually writing out a conversation between us and the hero. It's just, but that's how
it could be structured that way too.
That was meant to be as a metaphor, right? We're not actually writing like he said this and I said that.
If that's actually the way you want to write it, you can, right? You can have this imagined conversation and actually, build on the legend of your hero in that way, right? Because if you look at Eduardo Galeano's piece, his imagined conversation builds on the things that we all know about Pablo Neruda, right? It builds on the fact that Pablo Neruda hated the dictatorships. It builds on the fact that Pablo Neruda absolutely loved good wine and was very much known for being a wino in that way, and Pablo Neruda was known to have a lot of affairs, honestly. And so those are the kinds of things that are brought up. And he was like the supreme love poet of Latin America. So some of those legendary components, those are the actual grains of truth that are being invoked in this legend, and it builds on that legend of Pablo Neruda. The legend of your heroes, especially in the case of those that are not public figures, that's what you've been doing up to this point through the ode, through the corrido. If you did actually write a little mini bio the very first week, kind of using the questionnaire as the basis for a mini bio, that is also building on the legend, or you're establishing the framework of the legend that way. And now it's time to polish it into the pearl that this legend will become. So I hope that kind of helps. Hope that inspires.
Is there a way to get a copy of the bio? Because I don't remember what I wrote.
If you actually go to the Google Classroom assignment for the very first week, you can click on the questionnaire, the link to the questionnaire, and you should be able to access your answers, as long as you're using the same email address that you used before. But you should be able to get access to your answers. So, yeah. Any last questions for this week? Any last comments regarding the lesson here? No?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, I guess that'll be it for today then. And I just wanted to remind you all that next week we will have a session, and it'll be an opportunity for you to share the work that you've been doing up to this point with the rest of the group, whoever else is able to make it. So that way, live in person, or virtually, I should say, you'll be able to get some feedback on the things that you've been writing up to this point. And also, I encourage you and everyone else that catches up by watching the video to actually upload your work on Google Classroom, so that way I can give you feedback in writing on the work that you are submitting. Feel free to use Google Classroom as a tool as well for talking to your other classmates, even though you may or may not be able to attend the live sessions. So, and then one last reminder, you have until the end of this month, until the end of December, to finalize your pieces and get them to me, Javier, and Abraham for us to begin working on the final book and the final illustrations that Javier and Abraham will be doing of your heroes. So, yeah. So that'll be it for today. If there's any questions that come up after our session today, feel free to use Google Classroom to reach out, or you can always email me directly. So that'll be all for today, guys. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.